Hi, my name is Mike. I'm an in-house consultant here at The Profs, and in today's video I get to talk about one of my favorite subjects ever, and that is physics. Well, one of my favorites behind maths, of course. More specifically though, I get to talk about how to get an A star in physics A-level, or in the physics A-level specifically. And that is not necessarily the easiest thing to do in the world. In fact, it's been voted as one of the most challenging subjects to study at A-level across all A-level subjects to date that we have at the moment. But with a lot of expertise that, it comes from my end as well as from a lot of different opinions from a lot of my friends who are tutors in this area, I'm happy to impart what I know about how to get ready for an A-level like this in order to boost your grades. Considering also, I've just taken this year's AQA A-level physics papers, so I think I will have a lot more to say in particular about exam technique and in terms of revising for your subject. So the first tip that I have in mind is really know your specification. I've said this with other A-levels before, but if you get your specification with the exam boards sort of already known, then you know exactly what you're going to be tested on. That also gives information about how your exams are going to be structured. You should be able to find information for various different exam boards here on the screen. Although I encourage you to do a lot more of your own research in terms of where the differences are. This could be useful if you're actually in a position where you're choosing between different exam boards. So if you're not with a school, let's say you're homeschooled, and you're with your mum or your dad, and you're deciding actually what exam board is going to be easier or harder. I mean, the answer is none of them are, but there are certain differences in how they structure things. You should expect in the majority of these A-level exam boards to do 3 papers. The first paper is on the first year of physics, so that's going to be your AS level physics. Then the second year is going to be your A2 level physics. And then you will have what we call a synoptic, I can't say the word properly, synoptic paper that tests you on everything, as well as your practical skills. We'll get into that in a bit. But as to how they ask it could be different. So for instance, I know that in AQA physics, from experience, they have in paper 1 and paper 2, a multiple choice section, which comprises a lot of the papers, but that doesn't necessarily exist in other exam boards. So if perhaps you're not a big fan of multiple choice questions and answering them for whatever reason, you might want to choose a different exam board instead. Or if you want to do less papers, say if we look at like OCRB, for instance, that only has 2 papers plus a practical endorsement component, then that might be a better exam board to go with. So do your research if you're in that position, but if you're not, it's probably good to do this earlier rather than later to learn what the structure of each of your exams are going to be so you don't have any nasty surprises when you get there to those exams. So in terms of doing well in the exams, the first thing you kind of have to do first though is make sure that you understand the fundamentals of physics. And you want to be able to be in a position where you can use those ideas and skills in whatever question you like. So you have to be able to know your knowledge enough to apply it in unknown situations. The level of understanding that is required to do that is probably more than just being able to read your textbook and just remembering facts. So it's not necessarily enough to be able to remember specific kinds of Feynman diagrams for different particle interactions. You might be presented with a new kind of particle interaction that they say is based on one that you know, and you have to kind of fill in the blanks there. That only really builds, in terms of that transferability, on sort of outside curriculars and exposure to the papers. So if you're not necessarily going for something, if you're not really going for physics and you're needing physics just as an additional subject, but maybe you're going for a competitive university, I would suggest looking over past papers, not just from the exam board you're on, but from other ones too. But do make sure that actually the exam objectives or the curriculum objectives align if you're going to do that. Because it doesn't make sense to be learning, for instance, about like fluid dynamics in one A-level if it doesn't come up anywhere in your own syllabus. at the very least if you just want to pass it with a very good grade. Of course, though, if you are applying for physics at university, that's a completely different situation, and you might be doing that in order to boost your overall application. So depending on your situation, though, or regardless of your situation, don't just sit on what you learn in classes. Don't sit on just those experiences. Put in some time at home to truly understand what you've been taught in school. My next tip is one tip that I myself almost missed when I was getting ready for exams, as somebody who was studying A-levels from home, and especially as someone who didn't have access to a laboratory, is understand all of the required practicals. So in every single A-level, I think regardless of which exam board you go with, you're going to have a list of about 12 different practicals that you need to be able to explain, talk about all of the apparatus for. You need to be able to say what the expected results are. You need to be able to talk about all the safety measures. You need to be able to say why you've taken the actions that you've taken, what are the control variables, what's the dependent, what is the independent. And then you need to understand as well where the sort of the mathematical aspects come into this. So if you are to draw a graph, what kind of graphs are you drawing? What area of the syllabus is your experiment relating to? So you need to know this inside and out before taking your final exams. After all, that third paper is going to be talking, in most cases, regardless of the exam board, if it has 3 papers, that third paper is going to be talking a lot about your practical skills. But they do sometimes come up in paper 1 and paper 2 as well. So really, really do your revision on those particular practicals, even if the last time you covered it was over a year ago. So don't let that fade into memory. I will say as well, for the very, very top physics A-level students, is make sure that you don't just learn a bunch of formulae, you learn how to derive those formulae, and you learn where those formulae are most applicably used. So for instance, if you're looking at the fraction gratings, where does the formula for that come from? What approximations have been made? You want to be thinking as well, have there been any small angle approximations for things? Under what circumstances are the approximations strong? But we cannot just go by, oh, I know E is equal to mc squared, so therefore, like, that's all I need to be able to remember. They're not testing you on how well you can remember a formula, because they will give you a formula booklet already. Though it is good to double check what they will give you. What they're really interested to know is whether you are aware of what the larger context is with them, how you can manipulate them to find other things, and sometimes where they come from. Particularly in statistical mechanics, if you're on the AQA side of things, where you have to learn how to derive the average kinetic energy of a particle in a box. And this is if you're going by kinetic theory specifically. Also, learning the base assumptions of different models is really important. That's a really good example of one that you should be learning. So do spend the time to really get that understood. They're going to be really easy marks in your exam if you can do that. And A-star students are already doing this months and months before they even get into the exam room. My final top tip for an A-level like this is practice, review, and reflect. 3 things that are really, really important whenever it comes to doing well in any A-level. You want to practice early, you want to review how well you've done, and you want to use that to reflect on where your strengths and weaknesses lie. The only way that we learn and we get better in something like physics or maths or computer science or whatever subject rather, is by failing a little bit first. We need to know where we don't fully understand a concept, or we don't know how an application of a concept works really. And then we need to be exposed to the correct ways of doing something, and then we need to be able to store that in our long-term memory. That's a natural part of the learning process. And if you're doing that on a regular basis, if you're doing that early, then you're allowing yourself to be able to learn as much as possible about the subject. Physics is no exception, so try to get into this habit of failing in order to succeed. Obviously, don't try to fail on purpose, but don't be afraid to try. And I would be doing that as early as possible within your A-level classes. If you need additional assistance, of course you have your teachers to be able to refer back to. Do reach out to them early and say, I really didn't understand what was said in this lesson. Can we go over this? If you get into early practice with that, then you're not going to be left behind in the middle of your physics A-level classes. Hey there, I hope you enjoyed that video. If you have, make sure you leave a comment in the comment section below. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear some discussions from you. Otherwise, if you think that this video is going to be useful for your friends or family, please share it. If you've liked it, make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. And if you want to get in touch with a tutor like me or any one of our subject experts on this, then please have a look at the information on screen and make sure you get in contact. And as always, best of luck with your application.